Welcome to the latest edition of the OmniTalk Retail Ask an Expert series. I'm your host, Chris Walton.
And I'm Mezzenga.
And we are the founders of OmniTalk, the fast-growing retail media outlet that is all about the companies, the technologies, and the people that are coming together to shape the future of retail. Or as we like to say here at OmniTalk, the media organization that focuses on tomorrow, today. And our next guest, I'm going to say it, likely needs no introduction. I think I can say now that he has officially been on our show more than anyone. I think that's got to be true at this point. Don't you think, Ann?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. And so I am pleased to introduce Placer AI's SVP of Marketing, Ethan Chernofsky. Ethan is here once again, as he is always at this time of year. I think this is our third year in a row doing this. He's here to present his mid-year report card across retail. So Ethan, welcome back to OmniTalk. And are we actually going to see some grades this time, or what's your plan for today? Because we never know. We see this live as you do it. What's your plan here today?
So I mean, I feel like I'm taking the concept of grades with a degree of flexibility. Like it's like with kids when they're like interesting scores, and it's not like A, B, C, D. So we're gonna go grades, but we're gonna be broad in how we think about the
meeting grade level expectations. Is that what that's the kind of thing that we're going to? Yes.
Satisfactory. Yeah.
Satisfactory.
Work on for next year. Got it.
We're going to go Montessori. We're going to go in whatever direction Ethan wants to go with this conversation, I think. And we're all just going to, Ann and I are just going to be right there along for the ride. I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. Well, before we get into this discussion, just a quick reminder for everybody who's joining us live on LinkedIn today that you can place your questions for Ethan and the team directly into the chat to the right side of your screen. And we will try to get to all of them as Ethan is going through his very objective report card this year. Ethan, let's start out first.
More subjective, and it sounds like it might be more subjective.
Yes, right. So before we jump in, Ethan, maybe just give some people who are new to Placer AI a quick overview on what it is and about the data that you're collecting that kind of helps inform some of these subjective grades that we'll be getting this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Placer's a location analytics company. What that means in the simplest version, people vote with their feet, show you how they vote across the United States every single day. We do that by observing a panel of tens of millions of devices. Very critically, it's all aggregate data that has been stripped of identifiers like MAID, so we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. We then utilize machine learning and AI algorithms on top to make estimations of retail visits to locations across the country. And we show that in a wealth of different reports within our platform on everything from true trade areas, the customer journey, pre and post shopping patterns, and everything in between.
All right. So I think I could do that myself now at this point, having had you on this show so many times. Oh my God. All right. So let's not keep the audience in suspense any longer, Ethan. What's the number one thing you're going to hand out a grade on this year?
All right, so we're going broad.
Broad first. Okay, broad strokes.
Overall retail performance.
All right.
I'm giving it a big fat A.
An A.
All right.
I'm giving it a big A. Not an A plus, but an A.
An A. Okay.
An A with I'm gonna put a line underneath it. And I think there's a couple of reasons, right? So reason number one is that I do think we're experiencing this kind of retail renaissance, especially in the brick and mortar environment. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we're seeing this so soon after kind of the retail apocalypse narrative kind of gave way into this retail renaissance concept, I think is really, really important. And it comes into even greater view in the first half of this year when you look at kind of the visit metrics. So for example, we saw January down a bit year over year, largely because of inclement weather. And then as the weeks went on, it improved and improved. And then February was strong and March was strong. And even the kind of flatter April was actually not all that flat. It was heavily impacted by a couple of core weeks, one taking place at the end of March, one taking place at the end in early April, where visits were significantly up or down year over year because of when the Easter holiday fell out last year, which changes each year. So I think when we look overall and we think of how consistent it's been in terms of strength, we have to give it an A. And I think there is really impressive elements here, and it's something that's a kind of a common theme of the strength is a result of the decisions that were made. So it's not like that we talk so much about kind of tailwinds and headwinds, But I think a lot of retail success still comes down to smart companies making smart decisions. And I think so much of the success that we're seeing is directly attributable to the smart decisions that are being made. Now, there is one warning sign here. So giving it an A, but definitely there's an asterisk at the bottom of saying, hey, there's one behavior I want you to watch. And that is the concept of visit value. So we had pre-pandemic, we had a good sense of what a visit meant. And then obviously that changed dramatically during the pandemic. So we saw this mission-driven shopping where people were making less trips, but each trip mattered much, much more. And you saw that with basket sizes. And as we've gone away from the pandemic, that's stopped being the case. So mission-driven shopping is no longer the key trend. And in fact, we see the opposite almost, which is consumers are willing to make more trips than they would in the past. To take the grocery sector, we're seeing larger degrees of cross-shopping and more visits per week overall to that segment than we were seeing in the past, which is largely being echoed by what we're hearing from grocers, which is they're battling not to get people in the doors, but to get people to spend more and more of their to spend more and more of that kind of wallet share for grocery within that one location. And so I do think it really matters. It's less about kind of the value of each visit and more about, it's less about driving the visits and more about now, how do I drive more value from each visit?
Converting the visit, right? So
converting it for larger,
that's
the place.
Right. So is that a function? Is your theory then that that's a function of the macroeconomic environment, people being more price discerning and comparison shopping across multiple retailers and being willing to make those trips now across multiple retailers because their budgets are constrained?
So I think it's part of it is the macro environment, right? Like, so I'm looking for value. I'm not going to overspend on this product. I'll go to another place in order to go cheaper. The other piece of it is products that people love. So I think grocery is another really good example of, and we've always known this about someone like Trader Joe's, where it's not the only grocery store you go to, but you go there consistently because you love certain products that only they have. And so this idea of specialization is really important. And we'll talk about this with another kind of trend to come. But this idea of understanding what brings people into stores really, really matters. And this idea of, I think we're coming towards a really important question for a lot of retailers, which is, do I want to specialize more? Or do I feel like I have more space to play where I can increase the basket size that people are getting within my four walls?
Well, and I have to imagine, this is going to bring in a lot more loyalty conversation and the importance of those loyalty programs too, so that you do feel justified in spending more money in some of those stores than you normally would.
And
I could agree more.
And retail media too, especially, I imagine, because Ethan always likes to talk about that too. So I imagine that's got to be teed up here at some point. But Ethan, I want to ask you too, because on the right side of this graph, there is a little bit of an anomaly. And that's the home furnishings business. So the home furnishings business, is that picking up? Is there any other insights or nuggets you can give us on that one?
So it's such a great question, and I'm actually going to use it as the swing into the next slide.
All right. See, folks, we have no idea. We have not seen this ahead of time. We have no idea this is coming. So that was
this is years. This is years of working together.
What do you need us for, Ethan?
I know,
we're
Jesus.
Completely
This is the magic. This is the magic that we create, my friends. Yeah. So the second half comeback. I'm giving it, and this is home improvement, home furnishings, electronics, even movie theaters, giving it a really potentially positive B-. And it would have been a C, because these are segments that have been getting hit, right? And they're hit for a lot of reasons. They're hit because of the pull forward of demand and what those demand cycles were in that space. And they're hit especially because of the macroeconomic environment. And this is a purchase where I can push off. But when you think about spaces like movie theaters, they're also hit for things that they can't control. So there just wasn't as much great content. You have the comp to last year. It's going to be a really difficult situation. Yet all three of these segments have done something really interesting, which is show progress throughout the year, right? So the movie theater space, obviously driven by that huge Inside Out launch, which drove like massive visitation across chains in mid-June. Home improvement and home furnishings both seeing their visits kind of uptick fairly steadily as we head into later and later in the year. Consumer electronics as well. These are really positive signs. And I think they're almost more important than just what they mean for the sector itself. So obviously, if I'm working in one of those spaces, I'm feeling a great sign of relief that these visits are coming back. But there's also an element of what it indicates about those purchases. So I think the demand cycle obviously is a key piece. But I do think that something that doesn't get enough attention is not the demand cycle, but it's the fact that it's a purchase that I can push off. And so if I'm uncertain about the economic environment and I'm uncertain about where it's going to be in a few months' time, I take a purchase like that and I'm like, I can wait a few months.
Right.
The idea that we're getting closer and closer to that point where consumers are willing to spend indicates not just spending capacity, but confidence in the spend, which I think is an even more important potentially indication for the wider retail market.
But
That's
reconcile
so
that for me, Ethan, because like that's different than what we've been reading lately. I mean, I think Ann and I talked on a recent podcast too. Like the consumer confidence seems like it's kind of getting worse and worse by the day here. So how do you reconcile that fact? Like what's the dynamic there? That
I don't think that's
consumers are behaving differently?
I don't think it's true. I think
You
we
just
see
don't think
consumers.
it's true.
I think consumers are getting more confident. I think we have been dealing. I think one of the dynamics that we are not that is super difficult to handle with sentiment is when you have such long periods of flux, right? So the idea of like, I mean, it's not that it's not true. Consumers are feeling a lack of confidence because they've been this extended period of feeling it, but it's the feeling. And the behavior is very often different from the feeling. And this is one of the things that like I love about being in the space of behavioral data is those places where it conflicts with what people think they think is actually one of the most interesting places. So I do think there is a growing sense of confidence, and that confidence might just be, hey, this is the world we live in now. It might not be that I think things are fundamentally getting better or that they're going to be amazing like they were for a few years ago, but I'm just more comfortable within that space. So I'm willing to go and consider these purchases again. So it doesn't necessarily mean that one is wrong or the other is right. It means that the dynamics are shifting between them. And this is what's interesting is no matter what behavioral data set you kind of look at, these places come up and they come up fairly frequently. Like my favorite of all time was I was working at a company called SimilarWeb that did digital data. And it was immediately post Cambridge Analytica. And the scandal hit. And 25% of people in the UK, according to an Ipsos poll, said they were going to immediately download or were strongly considering immediately deleting Facebook and all relevant applications. And the change in behavior we saw away from the trend line that had existed the previous year was, it wasn't 25%, it wasn't 20%, it was 0%.
Yeah, right.
So very often what we think we're going to do and what we're going to do, and it doesn't mean that isn't an powerful indication or a powerful kind of input, but it's not the whole story.
Well, Ethan, I want to press you a little bit. I'm a little worried that I might be walking into your next like point here that you're going to make. So, but this is also at the aggregate level, right? So is there, does it look the same as you double click in by geography, by income type? Like, is there anything there as well that needs to be accounted for or taken into consideration?
Yeah. Very, very good point. There are definitely nuances here. And so take home improvement and furnishings. Home goods is doing much better, and they're a leader in this category with a lot of locations. So they're going to drive a lot of visits.
Okay.
And some players who are on the higher end side of this space. I think what's interesting is that in the past, it was affecting everyone. And even if it's affecting fewer of the players within, and so the value players are better situated because of this, because of what we're experiencing still, that does matter, obviously. But from a 30,000-foot view, watching that wider space see that kind of visit gap contract consistently is still very significant.
Okay.
Ethan, one other question too I have as we're talking about this second half of the year is where are you projecting, like within an upcoming election here in the US? Like, do you think are you planning to see any ebbs and flows? Because I feel like we keep hearing like rumblings from some retailers about like, are people going to hesitate? And then will we see a big like push right after for the holidays? Like, have you started to take in any of that information or even to start hypothesizing based on some of the previous year's data that you have?
We don't have enough normal election cycles. Right. So that's the reality.
I think you could stop at normal elections. Yes. That's true.
It's kind of an oxymoronic phrase, actually. Yeah. Normal election cycle.
2020, it's still pandemic environment.
Right.
And so it very much influences the patterns that you saw. And our data starts Jan 1, 2017. So we don't see the full 2016 shift.
Got it.
So it is I don't know the answer to that. It's very possible that it's right there in front of us and we just don't
Sure.
have the context necessarily to call it out.
What's next?
Okay, the small format revolution. And
Oh, all right.
I am, this is when we're getting those weird grades. This is undetermined, but shows promise.
Okay, okay.
I don't know what I think about the small format situation.
Really? Okay,
I
that's kind
don't
of a
know.
departure for you, if I
I know.
remember right.
Yeah.
You were initially big on this, right, Ann? He was big on this, right?
Yes. This
I
was in
liked it.
summer school, maybe? Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying?
maybe,
Yeah.
but it could. It's like maybe they need to just work a little bit harder. Like I am here. Let's think about the advantages, which I think are super exciting, right?
Mhm.
So the idea that in theory you can be very focused and targeted, the idea that you can kind of have much more optionality in terms of where you're located. There's a tremendous amount of promise that offers. I just think from an execution perspective, that's so difficult to deliver on. So we look at things like, I think Bloomies is a really smart concept off of Bloomingdale's as like a really, it makes sense, it fits, it's not competing.
So do we. We think so
I understand
too.
that. I think it's brilliant. I look at like small format and grocery, and it gives something interesting from the sense of like real estate flexibility. I want to be in certain types of locations, but I can't fit my massive box in that location here, which is great. But do I think it really changes something? Does it force retailers to adapt too much? So in some of these spaces, I'm really excited by it. In other of these spaces, I think it has more to prove. And I think some of the early metrics of like visit growth there are very powerful signs of strength, but this also a lot of it is this is a much more widely used concept. So it's one of these where it could be amazing, but it also could be, okay, this is nice, but it's not like really game changing.
Yeah.
Well, Ethan, let's talk about that because you're bringing up two very interesting case studies here with this slide and in the conversation, right? And for those listening on the audio recording, later on that aren't watching the webinar too, he's got a picture of Sprouts growth here and their small format against Bloomingdale's. And so to your point, like Sprouts to me feels like a different conversation because Sprouts is about finding the whatever optimizes your ROI given the square footage you're going to put into that space. Mm-hmm. That's what it's about. It's about optimizing the box that you currently have, the operation you have. Whereas Bloomingdale's is like, that's a new business venture. Like, let's go small. Let's get the Bloomingdale's into more countries or more communities throughout the country that don't have access to it. And so that's like a different step. And then you've got the Macy's side of that sitting in the middle, which is like, okay, we already have the department stores. Where do we go with the small formats here? How do you think about it, with that framework or that lens, Ethan? I'm curious.
So it's funny because the Macy's and Bloomingdale's obviously, are, it's one entity, but it's what I love about it in the Bloomingdale's situation is I do think it's, for me, conceptually, it checks all the boxes. It brings this brand in a revised format to new places that it couldn't go before. And those ways limit its potential. So it kind of needed this refresh, and I think it makes a ton of sense in the way that it was distributed or executed, excuse me. When you think about Macy's, right, I view it much more through the lens of here's a brand that, again, has identified some degree of ceiling of what it can do with its classic format. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate and respect hey, we're trying new things. We're trying to see what works. And so this is one of those avenues to check out what kind of drives value for them and what brings kind of more success or more opportunity for growth and expansion over time. It's not as clear cut to me as the Bloomingdale's relationship, where it does feel like those two exist on kind of like a spectrum of this is the evolution of the brand for specific audiences. And I think Macy's is still trying to identify what does that mean for them? And look, we're not doing a department store conversation today, but like, we always could. A lot of this is just like how do department stores need to change? Like, what has to happen there? And I think that's there. So Macy's is poking at a lot of different places at once.
Yeah. And I think that you have to take into consideration too, that Bloomies is an entirely new concept for this shopper that is driving traffic to come check out that concept. Like there's Bloomingdale's going small format I think is a better apples to apples comparison than Macy's going small format,
Right.
where like Bloomie's is something that no one's ever seen before. So I think
Right.
the numbers that we're seeing on the screen here make sense because people, especially people in that luxury market who are still spending money, are looking for like what will this new concept include, and does that replace the need for a full scale department store or Bloomingdale's? At least that's the way I'm thinking about it, Ethan. I don't know if the data is showing you something similar.
No, I think you're kind of nailing it on the head. And I think one of the challenges is you don't want to, like, there's lots of concepts that I got really excited about that clearly never panned out. And there's certain concepts that you're like, oh, this is never going to work, and then they don't work. And so you're still in those earlier stages. So we don't know what the result's going to be. We're going to find out. But I think there are ones where, again, watching from the outside, I put a lot of my chips into the middle of the table on Blooming's.
Yeah. Right. So I'm curious though, because you kind of hedged on this in the intro. You were saying like, kind of this is the summer school portion of the presentation. So why the hedge then? Is it because like, because people like Macy's are going after this too, or others are trying to replicate the same thing, that makes you kind of say like, hey, we still need to understand this more. There's differences between Sprouts approach, Bloomingdale's, Macy's. Like, what's your thoughts
Because
there?
I think part of it's happening a lot, and
You're hearing the conversation a lot.
Yeah, you're hearing the conversation quite a bit.
Yeah, you
but
are.
I think where I'll use an example of a innovation that I wasn't in on at all, which is like, I didn't like Just Walk Out. I thought Just Walk Out had very specific applications, but I thought at wide scale currently, maybe something in the future, but it doesn't. I didn't get it, right? And I felt like there was a ton of buzz, and that buzz was bigger than where the short-term application would be. And so that's where I see this too, where like there's something here, but I don't know that we know why that thing is, and therefore to actually scale it, you have to know exactly what it brings to the table, and I don't know that we know exactly what it brings to the table yet.
So said another way, the phrase small format may be getting too much attention in the media. As a phrase, as a concept, as a strategy point?
Yeah, it's like, there's a nugget there, but if you don't know why, it makes it difficult to scale that. Like, that's the biggest challenge for any business around any concept, is you do things where you stumble onto a success, but if you're not able to clearly delineate why it was successful, and you can't expand it the way you want to.
Great point. It's not that it's a small format, it's the right format.
Yeah, 1,000%.
What do you got for us next?
There it is. Ding, ding, ding.
I
waited this long. My God.
I couldn't. It's so funny because when I was putting it to the deck together, I was like, well, I'm not gonna not include it. I love it too much. But I am coming at it with a different angle. I'm coming at it with, I am, as you have stated, I am among the very, very bullish about the potential and promise of retail media in the brick and mortar environment. I think, for all the reasons we've discussed ad nauseum, I think the mentality of the consumer, I think the potential to engage with them when they're close to the point of sale, I think all of this is very exciting. I think it maximizes the marketing and advertising value that they bring to the table. I think there is a huge upside and opportunity here. With that said, I think there has always been risks, right? There are risks like, is this annoying, right? So, think about online ads early on. You kind of get showered with pop-ups. Like, that's not a good experience. Could this hurt? I think it's a problem. I think it's a fairly manageable problem. There is the issue of it not being kind of physical oriented. So like QR codes that take me out of the physical experience and have me looking at my phone while I'm in a store, I think that removes the power of the kind of the advertising experience within the physical environment. Again, fairly small problem, not one that really concerns me. But when we were looking at numbers, when Costco announced that they were kind of launching theirs, and we were looking at the distribution of stores for Costco, Sam's Clubs, and BJ's, and then we were also looking at Wawa's expansion within the South Florida area, it was kind of triggered for me what the real concern is here, which is it's too disparate and it's too inaccessible. So there are a lot of players who are like, yeah, I get it. I get what the promise is. I love the idea that I could say, hey, I want the 300 Costcos that have this type of demographic or psychographic mix, and that's where I want to advertise my product. That is tremendous. But if I have to go to Costco, and I have to go to Walmart, and I have to go to BJ's, and I have to go to, Ulta, and I have to go to all these different companies, I can't scale this. It's just not how these businesses work. It's too much going on at the same time. And there is this risk that we waste the buzz and the excitement and the energy that's being put into it, and we don't catch the wave at the right time, which doesn't mean it won't happen. It'll happen. It'll just take a lot longer than it needed to. And the shame of it is it means retailers are going to miss out on the opportunity that exists in front of them over the next few years when it's something that could be realized much faster. And the biggest question is going to be, how do you make it very easy for brands and agencies to access those networks? Because when you look at just how disparate it is, it's not conducive to easy access yet.
So what that tells me then is this is going to be a digitally led concept. The rise of the retail media network is going to be a digitally led concept. I mean, there was just reports out a couple of weeks ago about Walmart's online traffic is around 11 billion, across the interweb, so to speak. And so that tells me that that's where this is going to happen first, because if you're right, and plus we don't even know how to activate this in a store environment yet either. That's the other thing. So the other point, I'm like, okay, does Costco start putting a ton of digital screens that they can manipulate on the fly in real time in their stores? I don't know. That doesn't seem really akin to Costco's business model per se. So it makes my big takeaway from this, I don't know if you guys agree with this, is that this is going to be retail media is going to be a very, very much a digitally led initiative here in the next 5 to 10 years.
I think that the question is, we have it's almost like there's a choice that's laid out right now.
Yeah.
Retail media is going to be digitally primary or primarily digital over the next couple of years. I think that was going to be the case no matter what.
Right.
Where we
but
have
even more so? Well, no, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but the question is, do we take the steps today that make it closer to the 5-year mark where physical starts to grab significant portions of that share, or is it closer to 10 years plus? And that is going to be heavily oriented towards how easy is this to deploy? How easy is this to access? Can I access across multiple networks at once?
Yep.
And I think what the likeliest scenario, I heard this interestingly enough, we were together in Paris for a conference and talking to someone there.
Yeah.
The real game is going to be who's going to establish themselves as that kind of connection point, because whoever is the connection point between the multitude of brands and the multitude of retailers with the kind of inventory to sell, there's a massive opportunity there.
Right. Well, and I think that's where, Placer, not to plug Placer here, but I think that it was very important as retailers are investing more heavily in digital. Like, how are you able to track and measure and make sure that the people who are coming into store, who are starting the journey digitally, are captured in that way too, and that retailers can show kind of the 360 view of the consumer and pay off the retail media investment that those brands are making.
I totally agree. I actually think the measurement piece is there. It's what we're going to struggle with is, can we get people to deploy at scale? Because if we can get them to deploy, if we can get them to media plan the way, there's again, just this massive opportunity. But we have to simplify it, because it's people's jobs are hard. We sometimes talk about these concepts of as if it's so easy to do,
right?
And it's not. Everything is hard. And so I think realizing that it's difficult, we have to figure out how to simplify.
Ethan, let's go on to the next one.
All right. This is a B of hey, solid work, but you gotta tweak this up. Okay.
Not bringing you home to mama yet, right, Ethan? Okay.
Not yet. This is one of my favorite concepts.
Value ceiling.
The value ceiling. One of the most prevalent narratives in retail over the last few years has been the bifurcation of retail. Okay. Things are moving towards luxury. Things are moving towards value. It makes a lot of sense. Again, a lot of evidence of how true that concept is. I think the one thing, if you actually believe wholeheartedly in that narrative, then there's almost a direct consequence of it that leads to the tri-furcation of retail, where there's a third element.
I'm sorry, trifurcation.
Trifurcation. Okay.
I'm making up
words. You
words.
get immediately moved in 2 grades ahead for using that word.
I hope so. This is my Shakespeare moment. We're making up words as we go. But I actually think it leads to the return of the middle. And I've talked about this. We've talked about this before. I love this concept a lot. And I think it's because there is a ceiling on how much that can be done, and these spaces are saturated. And the value segment has shown that a ton in the last 6 months. So again, increasing investments in Five Below and upper end products, increasing investments from brands like Dollar General and Pop Shelf, as to their flagship. The challenges that, Family Dollar, Dollar Tree, so much of what we looked at when we looked at why they were closing stores, and there's lots of stories of, oh, there was issues with their warehouses, there's issues with their store experience. There was also tremendous cannibalization from their true trade areas between stores that they owned. So they had too many locations within an area where their consumers were willing to travel. So you don't need both of those locations. And I think what we're realizing is there's not infinite expansion opportunity. There's only a limited amount of stores that can exist within a given space within that value lane. And therefore, to find new places to expand and grow, you need to figure out how to deliver in other spaces. Now, I don't think Dollar General is launching a luxury, retail brand. And so I think the next step up is what we've seen with Top Shelf. It's that degree of separation above. And as we think about where that's going, it's telling us that retail there's lots of places to go if you're looking for value. There's lots of competition and places to go when you're looking for luxury. And so there's two ways of looking at it. One, like I think you're going to see the return of the middle. Brands like, in my mind, Target, who understand what we're willing to spend on and what we want to save on and how to put those all together in a combined experience. Or more striations of the value lane. So different layers of that where, there's full value and slightly lesser value and kind of like, light value. And that could be the approach as well. But I think either way, we are seeing that there is a ceiling on how much these brands can truly expand.
Interesting. I'm curious what you think on that, but like, I don't know if I agree with, I agree with parts of what you said. I don't know if I agree with it fully, because I think, I go back to like what Clayton Christensen at HBS used to always say, like everything always gravitates towards the lowest price. And I think the concepts like Dollar General going into Pop Shelf is telling me that, there's still more avenue to offer a greater degree of value in certain categories of products. And therefore that makes me think companies like Target actually are at further risk over the next 5 to 10 years than they are now. And so that to me means that there's going to be a continued bifurcation in general, and that the players that don't adapt and move their assortments down to give the value that they need to stay consistent with the marketplace are going to struggle. So I don't know if I see the middle profiting in this arrangement given that, but I think your point about there's going to be areas where people can go up in price too to still provide better prices than what the market has is what's really interesting to me.
Oh, interesting. See, I fundamentally disagree. Whatever the guy's name was, I apologize, but that everything's always about seeking the cheapest price. I think that's not true. And in fact, like everything, it comes down to, like, in my mind, the most over, and again, the last year or two has been the counterexample, but I think the most over abused concepts are that people will pursue value at any cost. I don't think that's true. And people will convenience is the most important thing. I think that's absolutely false. I think both of those concepts are not true. And I think consumers prove consistently, when you look at their behaviors, that they're willing to spend more for things that they love, and they're willing to do inconvenient things for things that they love. So they will drive 15 minutes in the wrong direction to go to a different Target as opposed to going to the Target that's 5 minutes from their house, because that's the good Target, right? We have these behaviors are so interesting, and we see them across the board, across segments. I do think there is a big question of, do you believe that, again, these differing degrees of value, or do you believe, like kind of what I'm saying, that there's going to be this resurgence of the middle? Because what I'm saying has a lot less evidence, right? Like, it's not like, again, leave Target aside, right? It's not like there's many examples of people who are crushing within that perspective right now.
Yeah, neither is Target. I mean, who else even occupies that middle in your mind? That's the other thing I would say.
You could put Kohl's there, and I think they're obviously not the greatest example of all time of like someone who's doing amazingly right now. I think the department store players, Macy's lives in that space too. So I think it's not the place that is seeing tremendous success now, but I think there's amazing room for success for those who can figure out and get it right.
Yeah, I think I would just add, I think the only thing that is missing from the Pop Shelf, the discount and dollar stores, and the Five Belows and the blue grocers that we see on the screen in front of us right now, is that the apparel category, like Chris was saying, like I think that's when you're looking at need states when it comes to value. I think the apparel category is nascent from this group of retailers, and when you're talking about the middle,
That's
I think
interesting too.
that's
especially
where
Shein
that's
and
where
Temu.
Ethan's talking about, like when you think about who the other players are in this space, or the opportunity for Pop Shelf to start looking at, like, how do I now carry like maybe basics like t-shirts and shorts or something of 3 different varieties so that I can drive more traffic or pull share from Walmart,
Right.
from Target, or those other places, because they are still giving you a value product, right? You know, a valuable apparel product at the right price that's also convenient. So I think there's still opportunity for those players, but then that's where I see the opportunity for some of these discounted dollar stores, is like, how are you making it worth someone's while to do more shopping in that concept with, you know, a little bit higher price point to accommodate for it.
Great point. And then I got 2 more, and I know we're
We
running
got
short.
2 more.
So
Okay,
we're gonna
no,
go. We're
it's
gonna
fine.
go. We're gonna go really quick. We're gonna
Let's
blast
go.
through.
No, it's okay. We're having
All right.
fun.
I love them all, right? We know I love them all, right? And I love them all because I think my favorite thing in the world is when everyone thinks something is going to struggle, and then you don't think it's going to struggle, and then it proves out that maybe it's not going to struggle so much. Like
So when you're right, Ethan, you
that's
like when you're
I know,
right.
but it's so
Right.
much fun when everyone's a little bit down on something, and then it
Yeah, I
has
got
a
this one
comeback.
way
Like,
wrong.
I love this.
Yeah.
I love this, and I think but there's another reason I love the mall renaissance specifically, and I think because it pokes at some really important questions about what retail is going to look like 5-10 years from now. Because I think one of my favorite things is when you talk to mall owners who are responsible for a lot of the malls in our indexes, they made really smart decisions like 10 years ago. This wasn't something that they decided to do yesterday and then just rode, tailwinds to success. This is decision making, and the pandemic hits, and then now they're like reaping the rewards. And I think a lot of it is, interestingly enough, to the conversation we were just having, the different value relationship between convenience and discovery. So what are people really looking for? The different value relationship between looking at sales per channel and sales more holistically. So I think one of the big questions that we're going to face as a retail segment overall is which brands really embrace the fact that I don't care where you buy a product, I care that you buy a product, versus, and that's, by the way, things like, how do I incentivize staff that work in store? How do I incentivize teams that run my online channels? Like, am I measuring them because we hit overall sales? Like, do I care if imagine, I know we decide to open up a fashion brand, and we open up a store and it sells 0 product in the store, but we're crushing all our goals, and that store is seeing a lot of people walk through its doors. Do we value the store enough to recognize that it contributes to the fact that we're doing our job? Like, all these questions are so significant. And I think we see so much of it within the mall environment, where there is this willingness to move away from like the classic channels that brought you success. There is this willingness to say, I don't need to have the same over-reliance on the things that were so part of what people expected of the mall. I can challenge some of these perceptions from a tendency perspective and really drive success. And the consumer is looking for something that is, again, we talk about this a lot, of like whether experiential or experience, whatever terminology you want to use, but they're looking for a reason to go out and something more complete when they are willing to leave their house and go to your location. And I think the malls really leaned into that effectively, especially top tier players, and it drove a tremendous amount of success. So a huge element of here that I think we saw also in this year.
It's fascinating, especially when you think about and look to the success of brands like Abercrombie and other mall brands that are really filling the space that's missing, like you said, Ethan, the missing middle. It has skewed to luxury or to a Shein or a Walmart, where you're spending, like, these mall brands are really having to think hard about where they're investing, and even like number of locations and things like that to make them more desirable, like you're talking about with the mall owners' decisions.
Yeah, I also think we
Several years ago.
sometimes forget. Yeah, it's a great point. I also think one of the things we forget is the Abercrombie example is amazing. It's like Abercrombie, for all the challenges it faces, they have done something that such a minuscule percentage of companies ever achieve, which is become a name brand, right? Everyone knows them. And I think you get multiple swings at the plate. You get cracks to kind of save yourself when you have achieved that status that others don't. And so for every kind of, RIP Bed Bath and Beyond that like doesn't make it through the conversion like process, like there are others who the fact that they establish that level of awareness, they get to reinvent themselves a couple of times in the kind of pursuit of that second wave or second life.
Yeah, and fashion is so cyclical by nature too that it gives you that opportunity in that category particularly. The other thing I'd point out here too, Ethan, is like the mall operators have done a great job, re-optimizing their portfolio, so to speak, of who they want in their malls and in which malls too, which is a big driver of this, right?
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I also think there's just that, again, like I feel like I have to shout them out every time, but like you think about like all the DNBs that are coming in, that are entering the space, that long tail of retailers who want to be in these top tier locations, the shift in focus, it just gives you more optionality of what you fill your kind of mall with, and that creates something better for everybody. I think the amazing thing about the mall success is that it's a waterfall effect. It's the fact that this approach means not just that one mall does better. I actually think it means that the wider mall space succeeds more as a result, just because of the kind of by necessity, it's pushing some other retailers to find new locations and new spaces in other places than they would have looked in the past.
Right. All right. Well, close us out. What do you got?
This is the comment at the bottom of the report.
Curtain call. Okay.
This is the comment. So you got all your grades. But what did the teacher write? You know what the teacher wrote? The teacher wrote important note, right? Which is that a lot of the things that are performing, headwinds and tailwinds happen. Okay, they are fleeting. Take advantage of the tailwinds, try to do your best in the headwinds, try to avoid them, obviously. But so much of, I think, what we learned of the successes in retail, especially in the last 6 months, are because of really smart strategic decisions that were made years prior. And a lot of it is, how do I give myself as much control as possible? And so let's take two fun examples from the last 6 months. One was the eclipse, okay? The eclipse, this is one of my favorite graphs we've ever done. It looks at where there were increases in hotel visits on the days of the eclipse compared to the daily average. And you see it exactly along the line of where the eclipse hit. Super cool. Yeah. And look at the brands that really, Warby Parker, Krispy Kreme had their specific kind of like full moon donut. Like it did really well. It led to these massive surges in visits. Brands like Starbucks, who looked at periods of time where they are not their weakest, and they launched this, hey, 50% off on Friday special, and the massive jump it saw relative to the norm. I think one of the biggest things for me is retailers can dictate a lot. It is very hard. I'm not minimizing how challenging it is. Even in difficult environments, you can turn bad situations a little bit less bad. You can turn good situations better, and you can orient yourself towards where retail is going. This is not something where you want to be carried in the winds. You want to have really clear decisions. And the more the retailers that we see making those very distinct decisions, that's where we need to head. And sometimes we're going to agree and sometimes we're going to disagree, but at least there's like forethought and they understand why they're going where they're going, and it's not just being carried.
Yeah, this to me is actually like the extra credit slide, Ethan. It's like you can do all you want to get the good grades, but you got to earn that extra credit too in case you just screw up that one exam, right? And that's what this is about. Like you got to have great merchandising, great marketing. And if you think about it smartly, you can get that extra credit with your consumer. And it can go a long way to bumping you up from a C to a B or a B to an A or an A to an A plus even, Set that curve, Ethan. Set that curve.
That's why you guys are pros, because you know how to bring us full circle. And we got there.
Well, Ethan, thank you so much for taking our audience through all of this very important mid-year report card data. If people have been enjoying this conversation or they didn't get time to ask the questions that they wanted to, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you and the folks at Placer AI?
So you can reach out. I'm at ethan@placer.ai. You can also reach out to ideas@placer.ai if you don't want to talk to me directly. And yeah, it was so much fun. Thank you guys as always. It was a joy.
Absolutely, Ethan. Well, that wraps us up. Thanks again to Ethan Chernofsky of Placer AI for sitting down with us today. And thank you to all of you who joined along with us live via LinkedIn and who listened to this playback after the fact. As always, thanks again, Ethan. We'll see you next time. And on behalf of all of us here at OmniTalk, be careful out there.